Melbourne, March 1st, 1999. The city continues to live its usual life, and no one suspects that soon the tranquility of its inhabitants will be disturbed by the terrible news about the tragic disappearance of a 15-year-old girl, whose name will soon become known throughout the country: Rachel Barber. The usual evening bustle in the city blocks did not portend trouble. For most residents of the metropolis, it was just another weekday. When teenagers were rushing home after school, adults were completing work chores, and dusk was falling on the city. But for one family, this day was the beginning of a tragedy that will be remembered for many years. Rachel Barber, a beautiful, talented young dancer, did not come home in the evening, as her parents expected. Phone calls went unanswered, anxiety quickly engulfed her family and friends, and a few hours later it was clear that something had gone wrong. After a few days of searching, it became clear that Rachel had not just disappeared. She was the victim of a brutal and carefully planned crime. This is a story about how envy can lead to tragedy, starting with a man who has been hiding his dissatisfaction with other people's successes for a long time. What started as a simple feeling of jealousy gradually grew, poisoning his thoughts and turning admiration into hatred. Over time, envy became the dominant emotion, absorbing the mind and pushing for irreversible measures. The internal tension reached a boiling point, and what could have remained only a fleeting annoyance turned into a brutal crime. This case was a testament to how envy can destroy not only relationships but also lives when it gets out of control. Over time, this story will be revealed in all the horrifying details. Rachel Barber was a girl who was often described as a ray of light. Born on September 12, 1983, she grew up in a loving family that always supported her aspirations and dreams. The parents, Michael and Elizabeth Barber, knew that their daughter had something special. Her main passion was dancing, and she has already achieved outstanding success in this art. From an early age, Rachel stood out among her peers with her talent and charisma on stage. When she was just 15 years old, her life revolved around studying at the John Frost Dance School in Melbourne. For her, every day was devoted not only to school, but also to hours of rehearsals, where she honed her skills. Dancing became more than just a hobby for her, it was her vocation. The parents, seeing their daughter's passion, supported Rachel in her endeavor and equipped the floors in her room so that the girl could train at any time of the day. Teachers and coaches noted her exceptional sense of rhythm, grace and passion with which she put her soul into every movement. Her friends and acquaintances recalled how her smile lit up the audience, and everyone who watched her performances could not help but admire her skill. Her immediate goal was to get into a dance competition that could open the doors to the world of professional dancing for her. Despite her popularity among her peers, Rachel remained a modest girl. She avoided conflicts, was friendly and welcoming to everyone. Her relationship with her family was especially strong. She shared with her parents her successes, plans for the future and dreams. She always paid attention to her sisters Heather and Ashley Rose, despite her workload. Her kindness and caring for her loved ones were unchanging qualities that made her a favorite in the family. However, behind her outward success and confidence on stage, Rachel was quite shy. Adolescence is always associated with finding her place in the world, and despite her popularity, Rachel sometimes felt vulnerable. She was not always confident in herself, as it might seem at first glance, and only the closest people could notice these moments of doubt. Being a popular girl, Rachel was courted by many guys, but her choice fell on a cute and good-natured classmate named Emmanuel Corella. To those close to him, he was just Manny. Friends called the couple Romeo and Juliet, finding similarities with these characters. However, as in Shakespeare's play, their relationship was linked to tragedy. In 1992 or early 1993, Rachel's family moved to Mont Albert, where they met neighbors, including a girl named Caroline Reed Robertson, who was 5 years older than Rachel. She quickly became a trusted person for the family, and often looked after the Barber children as a nanny, including Rachel, when her parents were away from home. While working as a babysitter, Caroline developed a strange obsession with Rachel. She admired the girl, found her skin clean and snow white, and her green eyes hypnotically attractive. After the Robertson family moved in, the girls maintained a relationship, but not a very close one. However, over time, these contacts became more frequent, which gradually began to cause Rachel confusion. But despite this, she kept in touch with Caroline, who seemed lonely and in need of friendship. Caroline Robertson was the exact opposite of Rachel. Unlike the young Barber, who had great prospects in life and was making progress in her favorite business, Caroline seemed on the verge of personal collapse. Born into a well-to-do family, but not distinguished by special well-being, Caroline has been a closed person since childhood. Her school years were spent alone, in rejection from peers and constant failures in social life. These early years laid the foundation for her inner attitude towards herself, a constant feeling of inferiority and envy of those who were more successful and happier. As she grew up, Caroline was unable to find stability. Attempts to improve life or find personal happiness were constantly failing. Her self-esteem was falling every year, and her inner complexes were getting deeper. She suffered from depression and, apparently, from undiagnosed psychological problems, which aggravated her sense of isolation and alienation from society. Caroline's family couldn't give her emotional support. Although she continued to keep in touch with her parents, her relationship with them was strained and far from trusting. She lived alone in a modest apartment, and her everyday life consisted of monotonous work at a telephone company and thoughts about how her life was strikingly different from the one she once imagined as a child. Envy of those who, in her opinion, were luckier or happier grew over the years. And when fate brought her together with Rachel Barber, a beautiful, popular, and promising girl, Caroline felt a growing inner irritation. She began to see Rachel as the embodiment of all that she herself had failed to achieve: talent, love, and the attention of others. This envy and feeling of inferiority gradually turned into an obsession to take over Rachel's life, literally become her. As Rachel got older, Caroline felt more and more empty in her life. Watching her life from the sidelines, Caroline began to fantasize about what it would be like if she could take her place, that is, literally become her. This idea could not leave her and grew into a painful dream, because Caroline saw in herself some similarities with Rachel, at least physically the same hair color, and some facial features. She began to look for ways to get closer to the object of her adoration, despite the age difference. Caroline was 19 at the time and Rachel was 14, which is a big age difference by the standards of teenagers. At first it looked harmless, like some kind of senior mentoring. She offered herself as a friend who could help or give advice. But in fact, what was hidden behind this was that she was carefully studying Rachel's life, her habits, surroundings, aspirations, collecting information that would later prove crucial to the implementation of her plan. One of Caroline's acquaintances later described her as a person who was always full of envy of others but knew how to hide it behind a mask of calmness. Her external behavior seemed restrained and even shy to others, but behind this facade there was a destructive and dangerous inner world. By early 1999, Caroline had become so obsessed with this idea that she made a final decision. She devised a murder plan, believing that she could become someone else and start her life anew. Everything had been thought out in detail, and in her head, it looked like an attempt to escape from her own pain and despair. March 1st, 1999, began as an ordinary teenage day for Rachel Barber. She woke up at her home in the suburbs of Melbourne, had breakfast with her parents, and Rachel's father took her to the tram stop at about 9:30 a.m., where she planned to catch the train to her dance school classes. Rachel was punctual. She returned home at about the same time every day, and if she was late, she always called her parents to warn them. That day, Rachel assured the family that she would board the final tram leaving at 6:15 p.m. to meet her father at the bus stop. But she never returned home. Her parents, Michael and Elizabeth Barber, began to worry. When Rachel didn't answer a few phone calls, they realized something was wrong. Elizabeth, feeling growing alarm, began calling her friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen the girl since she left dance school. It would seem that Rachel could just stay late or meet friends, but her phone was turned off, and she did not warn her parents about it, which was completely out of character for her. The parents' anxiety grew by the hour. At night, Michael and Elizabeth went to the police, reporting their daughter's disappearance. However, the police did not rush to search, as is often the case with teenagers. The next day, Rachel's parents, without waiting for the active actions of the police, organized their own searches. Michael Barber printed out photos of his daughter and began hanging them in the dance school area and throughout the city. Her friends also joined the search, combing the streets, abandoned buildings, and trying to find at least some traces. However, time passed and there was no information. 2 days later, the police began a search. The first steps were to establish the girl's route, where she was, who she was meeting, what she planned for that day. The investigation soon led to an unexpected turn. That day, after class, Rachel saw her boyfriend Manny. to whom she said that she was participating in some kind of secret psychological project for which she would receive a good reward. But the details of the project could not be disclosed to her, and therefore Manny did not know either the person she was supposed to meet or the place where the project was held. The young man's suspicions disappeared because he had a reliable alibi. Rachel was last seen with her friend Allison when they were heading to the tram intersection. The friends said goodbye and Rachel left, accompanied by an older girl who was very different from her. Witnesses from the tram said that their difference was striking. One was bright, smiling, and talked about something all the time. The second one is obese, silent, and with an untidy appearance. But detectives had yet to identify the second girl. Suddenly, the police receive information that a loan in the amount of $10,000 was recently issued in Rachel's name. This information immediately aroused suspicion, since a 14-year-old girl could hardly take on such financial responsibility on her own, or it could indicate an escape attempt. When Mike and Elizabeth Barber found out about this, they were shocked. Rachel has never expressed a desire to leave home or hide. She was immersed in dancing and making plans for the future. The idea that their daughter could have taken out a loan on her own, or even planned an escape, seemed completely incredible to them. But it would be better if it were so. The next step for the police was to detail Rachel's calls. Attention was soon attracted by the data on the last call that the girl made. It turned out that the last person she talked to was Caroline Robertson. The detectives realized that Robertson could become a key figure in the case and decided to visit her house for questioning. When the police arrived at the specified address, they were greeted by an alarming picture. Caroline Robertson lay unconscious with her face to the floor, her body unresponsive to external stimuli. The detectives thought she was dead. As it turned out later, she suffered from epilepsy, and at the time the police arrived, she had another attack. Caroline was immediately taken to the nearest hospital for first aid. When she came to her senses, the first thing the detectives started asking was what Caroline might know about Rachel Barber's disappearance. To which the girl replies with a completely cold-blooded tone, "She's dead, the police." Not immediately realizing her answer, ask again, to which the girl repeats, "I killed her. I killed Rachel." This statement stunned everyone present. Detectives immediately went to inspect Caroline's apartment. They found a bag of Rachel's clothes and an application for a birth certificate in the name of Rachel Elizabeth Barber, as well as Caroline's personal diary with all the details of her sick imagination. But they still had to find Barber's body. Caroline Robertson had been working out her plan alone and with cold, almost frightening reasonableness for several months. Rachel's murder was not a spontaneous act. Every step was thought out to the smallest detail. She didn't just want to get rid of Rachel, Caroline wanted to replace Rachel. Caroline figured out how to lure Rachel to her apartment. She seduced her by offering $500 to participate in a confidential psychological study. However, Caroline stressed that Rachel should keep her involvement a secret from everyone. Considering her age and the trust of an old friend, Caroline's offer seemed tempting to Rachel. The girls agreed to meet on March 1st. After lunch, they met at the tram stop from where they headed to Caroline's apartment. The girls ordered pizza. Robertson told Barber that they would begin the study by meditating and thinking about happy and pleasant things. Rachel relaxed into pleasant memories, but soon noticed that she felt sick. It turned out that Caroline had mixed a potent substance into her slice of pizza. Gradually, it became more and more difficult for Rachel to keep up the conversation, and eventually she lost consciousness. When Barber passed out, Robertson coolly wrapped a pre-prepared telephone cord around her neck and strangled the victim. She didn't flinch when she committed the murder, because she was sure that this was her only chance to find a new life. When it was over, the killer wrapped the girl's body in a plaid and hid it in the wardrobe. A few days later, realizing that she needed to get rid of the body, she wrapped it in 2 carpets and stuffed it into an army bag. After that, she called a taxi to her father's farm in Kilmore. Deceiving the driver, Caroline claimed that she was transporting the statue. There she buried Barber's body in a shallow grave in the family pet cemetery. The next morning, Caroline Robertson continued her usual routine as if nothing had happened, trying to act as if nothing had happened. However, despite her enthusiasm, Rachel's murder was the beginning of her own downfall. The crime turned out to be too much of a burden on her psyche, and soon Caroline began to make mistakes that would lead to her exposure. Her first mistake was that a few days after the murder, Robertson began to panic. Colleagues noticed that her behavior became more nervous and unstable. When Caroline became very ill, she took sick leave. A colleague took her home, and she did not go to work until the police found her. In her plans, Caroline was supposed to get a loan in Rachel's name. She has already applied for a new birth certificate in the name of Rachel Elizabeth Barber. This document was an important part of her plan. With a new birth certificate, she intended to create a new identity, officially establishing herself as Rachel Barber. Then she planned to move to Victoria, where no one else would recognize her under her old name. The idea was frighteningly simple. Caroline hoped that thanks to some similarities in appearance and a new birth certificate, she would be able to get lost, start a new life, and get away from her old unfortunate fate forever. She wanted to become Rachel not only in her head, but also in the real world. After the police received a confession from Caroline about where the body of the deceased was, they immediately sent a search team to the specified location. Upon arriving at his father's farm in Kilmore, investigators found a fresh, shallow grave, in which they found an already decomposing body. The police described the scene as creepy. A plaid soaked in mud hid Rachel's remains inside. The place was so remote that if it hadn't been for Caroline's confession, the body probably wouldn't have been found for a long time. For the Barber family, this discovery was a terrible confirmation of their worst fears. After seeing Rachel's body, they no longer doubted that their daughter had died at the hands of a man they had once trusted. When Caroline's condition stabilized, she was immediately taken into custody. In her first testimony, she said, "I wanted to be her. I wanted to be her." Caroline's mental state played a huge role in her crime. She lived in a world of morbid envy, which eventually led her to this terrible act. The police carefully collected all the evidence that was connected with the murder of Rachel Barber. Caroline Robertson has appeared in court charged with premeditated murder. Her confession and the evidence provided left no doubt about her guilt. During the trial, Robertson's defense focused on the defendant's mental state, arguing that Caroline suffered from mental disorders that prevented her from realizing the seriousness of her act. However, prosecutors argued that despite her unstable condition, Caroline was fully aware of her actions. One of the key pieces of evidence shedding light on her psychological state and motives for the murder were her personal diaries. The prosecutors provided recordings in which the accused planned the murder point by point. Psychiatric examination showed Robertson's drawings as evidence of her mental problems. One of the key proofs is a self-portrait painted by Caroline at the age of 14, where she depicted herself with exaggeratedly ugly facial features. Written around the drawing were words that reflected her deep self-loathing. "Loser, unwanted, dirty, fat." Next to her self-portrait, she wrote "face like a pizza." The recordings showed how low her self-esteem was, and how long she had been feeling disgusted with herself. This laid the foundation for her jealousy and obsession with Rachel Barber, a young girl who seemed to have been given everything Caroline so desperately wanted for herself. In addition, the prosecutors in court presented notes on the cover of one of Caroline's diaries, where she wrote how to change in 9 weeks, which at first does not arouse suspicion. However, there was something darker inside the pages of the diary. It was clear that Robertson not only wanted to get into Rachel's skin, but also plotted to disfigure Rachel and destroy the object of her envy, a beautiful, successful dancer. Another important element is the letters that Caroline wrote to her father. She often wrote about her self-hatred, calling herself ugly, obese, weird, and mentioned the meaninglessness of her existence. These diaries and self-portraits were crucial pieces of evidence in the trial, illustrating Robertson's path to murder. They showed the court and the jury that her actions were not spontaneous. It was the result of a long and destructive process that eventually led her to the fateful decision to take Rachel Barber's life. In October 2000, the court sentenced Caroline Robertson to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 14 years. Sentencing 21-year-old Caroline Robertson, Judge Vincent said the girl was killed to achieve an impossible and unrealistic dream. "You were motivated by envy of Rachel's beauty and personality. And above all, I am pleased because you believed that she would most likely have a happy and successful life that you would never experience," the judge told her. "What came out of all the material, in my opinion, is that you suffer from a deep-rooted personality disorder that contributed to your behavior, and at least at this stage you pose a real danger to anyone who might become the unfortunate object of your fixation." The judge concluded his speech. Rachel's family was disappointed with the verdict, considering it too lenient for such a brutal crime. For the Barber family, the loss of Rachel was an irreparable tragedy. "My parents and sisters were in deep shock and could not recover from the loss for many years. Caroline Reed Robertson was released on parole from prison in January 2015 after serving a 15-year sentence. The killer has never expressed remorse for her crimes. In fact, she apparently spent time behind bars, dramatically changing her appearance to look more like a victim. She transformed beyond recognition. She lost weight, straightened her hair, and something changed in her look. Later, when the victim's mother, Elizabeth Barber, sees her, she will say, "Her eyes. They have something similar to Rachel." However, the Barber family are still worried about Caroline's mental state and hope that rehabilitation can protect the community and Robertson will live a quiet life and will not cause any problems. Rachel Barber's story was a reminder of how envy can lead to murder. This is an extreme manifestation of the destructive effect of this emotion on a person. It can accumulate, destroying the inner world, provoking aggression and generating hatred for those who seem to be more successful. Such actions are based on a feeling of deep dissatisfaction with oneself, a sense of one's own failure and the unfairness of life. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of early identification of psychological problems and timely assistance to those who need support before internal conflicts and emotional trauma escalate into crime. Rachel Barber's death left a deep mark on the hearts of her family, friends, and everyone who was familiar with her story. Her short but vivid life became a reminder of the fragility and value of human life, and her tragic death was a warning about what psychological problems left unattended can lead to. In 2009, the film In Her Shoes was released by director Simone North with Guy Pearce and Sam Neill in the lead roles. It is based on the story of Rachel Barber and Caroline Reed Robertson. It depicts the events leading up to Rachel's murder and Caroline's subsequent trial. The film received positive reviews for its depiction of the events and performances of the actors. It was adapted from the book The Lost Girl, written by Rachel's mother, Elizabeth Barber.